Imagine someone told you that one of the most important technologies of the last 30 years was named after a Viking king who died more than 1,000 years ago. Not a scientist, not an inventor, not the founder of a tech company, a Viking. You'd probably assume they were joking, but every time you connect your headphones, your car, your smartwatch, or your speaker, you're using a technology whose name comes from that king. Even stranger, that little Bluetooth symbol you've probably tapped thousands of times isn't just a modern logo, it's actually his initials written in ancient Viking runes. And that's only half the story. Because once you press that little symbol, two devices somehow find each other, recognize one another, establish trust, dodge countless other wireless signals flying around the room, and begin carrying on an invisible conversation, all before your music has a chance to start. It's one of those technologies that works so reliably that most of us never stop to wonder what's actually happening. Today, we're gonna change that. The story begins, strangely enough, with a cable. Back in the late 1980s, connecting two electronic devices wasn't something you thought about, it was something you wrestled with. If you bought a phone, a computer, a headset, or just about any other piece of technology, chances were it came with its own cable. Different manufacturers use different connectors, different standards, and different ideas about what compatible meant. If you lost the right cable, you often couldn't simply borrow one from someone else. You had to find the exact cable all over again. It wasn't just inconvenient, it was messy. At Ericsson, one of the world's largest telecommunications companies, engineers began asking a simple question: what if the cable simply disappeared? The company wanted a short-range wireless connection that could do the same job without requiring a physical wire. To make that happen, engineers Jaap Hartsen and Sven Matthijssen began developing a new radio system that would eventually become the foundation of Bluetooth. The goal wasn't to revolutionize music or create wireless earbuds. Those didn't even exist yet. The original dream was much simpler: build a wireless cable. It sounded straightforward. It wasn't, because replacing the cable turned out to be the easy part. The real challenge was convincing everyone else to use it. Imagine Ericsson creating the perfect wireless system, but Nokia built a different one. IBM made another one. Intel made another. Suddenly your Ericsson headset could talk to your Ericsson phone, but nobody else's. The cable would be gone, the frustration would remain. A universal technology isn't universal unless everyone agrees to speak the same language. So throughout the 1990s, companies that were normally competitors began doing something unusual. They worked together. Ericsson, Intel, IBM, Nokia, and Toshiba joined forces to create a common standard that every manufacturer could build around. In 1998, they officially formed the Bluetooth Special Interest Group, whose job was to develop and protect those shared rules so that devices from completely different companies could communicate with one another. Without realizing it, they were trying to solve the exact same problem a Viking king had faced 1,000 years earlier. And that's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The king's name was Harald Gormson. History remembers him as Harald Bluetooth. He ruled Denmark during the 10th century at the height of the Viking Age. Around the year 965, Harald commissioned a massive runestone at Jelling to honor his parents, King Gorm and Queen Thera. Carved into the stone is an inscription claiming that Harald united Denmark and Norway and brought Christianity to the Danes. Today, historians often refer to the Jelling stone as Denmark's birth certificate because it's one of the earliest surviving records to mention Denmark as a unified kingdom. Now, it's worth pointing out that uniting a kingdom during the Viking Age didn't mean everyone gathered around a table, shared ideas, and voted on the best solution. And there was plenty of reminding your neighbors why disagreeing with a Viking king could be a very short-term career decision. Still, when history looked back on Harald, one idea stood above the rest. He united people who had previously been divided. About 1,000 years later, a group of engineers found themselves trying to do something remarkably similar. One of those engineers was Jim Kardach from Intel. Years later, Kardach shared the story of how the name came about. He and Ericsson engineer Sven Matthijssen had traveled to Toronto to present competing wireless proposals. The meetings didn't go particularly well, so afterward they did what countless other people have done after disappointing meetings throughout history. They went out for a drink. Somewhere during that conversation, Matthijssen began talking about Viking history and Harald Bluetooth. The comparison clicked almost immediately. Harald had united competing kingdoms. Their new wireless standard was trying to unite competing technologies. Bluetooth. It was perfect. Well, almost, because nobody actually intended to keep it. Bluetooth was only supposed to be a code name. Just a temporary name they'd used while the marketing teams came up with something more polished and professional. After all, surely one of the biggest wireless technologies in the world wasn't actually going to launch with the name of a Viking king. The permanent candidate sounded much more like technology. Names like Radio Wire or PAN, short for Personal Area Networking. Those sounded serious. Bluetooth sounded like something you get checked by a dentist. But then something unexpected happened. The real names ran into problems. PAN was already being used in too many places to stand out clearly. Radio Wire became tangled in trademark issues that couldn't be resolved before launch. Meanwhile, engineers, documents, and journalists had already started referring to the project by its temporary codename, Bluetooth. The placeholder simply refused to go away. And that's how one of the most recognizable names in modern technology survived, not because it won a branding competition, but because the backup plans fell apart. Somewhere, a carefully prepared marketing presentation lost to a 1,000-year-old Viking nickname, and honestly, I think history made the better choice. The nickname itself has its own mystery. The most common explanation is that Harold had a tooth that appeared dark blue or gray, earning him the name Bluetooth. But Harold lived more than 1,000 years ago, and medieval Scandinavians weren't exactly known for keeping detailed dental records. Historians still debate exactly where the nickname came from. It may have referred to a discolored tooth, it may have referred to something else entirely that's been lost as languages change over the centuries. Whatever the original meaning, the name survived. And when the engineers borrowed it, they borrowed something else too. The logo. Take another look at the Bluetooth symbol. Most of us never think twice about it. It's just Bluetooth. But it isn't a random collection of lines. It's what's known as a bind rune, a symbol created by combining two ancient Viking runes into one. One rune represents the letter H. The other represents B. Layer them together and you get the Bluetooth logo. Harold Bluetooth's initials have been sitting in the corner of your phone screen this entire time. Once you notice it, it's almost impossible to unsee. The name suddenly makes sense, the logo makes sense, but one question still remains. How does pressing that little symbol actually make two completely separate devices find each other? Because despite how effortless it feels, there's an astonishing amount happening behind the scenes. Imagine you take your wireless earbuds out of their case. A small light begins blinking. To you, that's just a signal that they're ready to connect. To the earbuds, it's more like standing up in a crowded room and saying, "Hi, I'm over here." Bluetooth devices communicate using radio waves in a portion of the radio spectrum around 2.4 gigahertz, a band that's available in most countries around the world. When a device enters pairing mode, it begins broadcasting tiny packets of information announcing that it exists and describing what it's capable of doing. Your phone starts listening. It scans the air for those little introductions until it finds one that matches what you're looking for. That's why opening your Bluetooth menu sometimes feels like walking into a party where everyone is introducing themselves at the same time. There's a television, a smartwatch, someone's car, 3 pairs of headphones, a printer you forgot you own, and somehow a mysterious device named BT07 that nobody in the building seems willing to admit belongs to them. When you tap your earbuds, your phone doesn't immediately start playing music. First, the two devices begin introducing themselves, and this is where people often mix up two words that sound almost identical: connecting and pairing. They're related, but they're not the same thing. Connecting simply means two devices are actively communicating. Pairing is the process of building trust. During that very first meeting, your phone and earbuds exchange information, verify one another, and establish the cryptographic relationship they'll use to communicate securely. If everything checks out, they save the relationship so they don't have to repeat the entire process every single time. That's why after the first setup, opening your earbud case usually feels almost instant. Your phone already knows who's walking into the room. It's a little like seeing an old friend across a crowded restaurant. You don't introduce yourselves again, you simply pick up the conversation where you left off. Of course, now another problem appears. The air around you isn't empty. We tend to imagine radio waves as though they travel through some peaceful invisible space. They don't. The 2.4 gigahertz band is one of the busiest places in modern life. Wi-Fi routers are using it. Game controllers, wireless keyboards, computer mice, smart home devices, security systems, baby monitors, fitness trackers, other Bluetooth devices. Depending on where you are, there may be dozens of wireless conversations happening all around you at the exact same moment. Even your microwave can create interference in roughly the same part of the radio spectrum while it's running. So how do your earbuds hear your phone through all that noise? Interestingly, they don't try to overpower everyone else. Instead, they keep moving. One of Bluetooth's smartest tricks is something called frequency hopping. Rather than staying on one radio frequency and hoping nobody interrupts, Bluetooth devices rapidly change frequencies together while they communicate. Think of it like two friends playing an elaborate game. Instead of standing in one crowded room trying to shout over everyone else, they agree ahead of time to meet in room 12, then room 48, then room 3, then room 61, hundreds of times every second. To everyone else, they seem to vanish, but to each other, they know exactly where the conversation is going next. Modern Bluetooth is even cleverer than that. If it notices certain frequencies are consistently crowded or noisy, it can avoid them altogether, choosing cleaner channels instead. In other words, Bluetooth doesn't succeed because the air around it is quiet. It succeeds because it has become remarkably good at navigating the noise. And once that invisible path has been established, your music can finally begin. Of course, your phone still isn't sending music, at least not yet. What it's actually sending is information. Every song stored on your phone is made up of digital data. Before that data can travel wirelessly, it's typically compressed using what's known as a codec, short for coder-decoder. Different codecs balance sound quality, transmission speed, and power consumption in different ways, but they all serve the same basic purpose: make the information small enough to travel efficiently through the air. Your phone then breaks that information into thousands of tiny packets and sends them all over the Bluetooth connections. Those packets race through the radio spectrum, hopping from frequency to frequency alongside your earbuds. When they arrive, the earbuds put them back in the correct order, decode the compressed audio, and convert that digital information into tiny electrical signals. Those electrical signals move an incredibly small speaker back and forth. That movement pushes and pulls on the surrounding air, creating pressure waves. Those pressure waves reach your eardrum. Your brain interprets them as music. It's amazing to think that your favorite song isn't actually traveling through the air. What's traveling through the air is a carefully organized stream of instructions telling another device how to recreate that song on the other side. All of that usually happens so quickly that it feels instantaneous. Usually. If you've ever watched someone's lips move just before you heard the words, you've experienced Bluetooth latency. Compressing the audio, transmitting it, buffering it, and decoding it all take a tiny amount of time. For most people, it's barely noticeable. For competitive gamers, it's enough to make them cling to wired headphones like treasured family heirlooms. When you stop to think about everything that's happening though, it's honestly remarkable. Your phone finds a tiny computer sitting in your ear. The two devices recognize each other. They confirm they're talking to the right partner. They navigate one of the busiest stretches of radio spectrum on Earth. They exchange thousands of packets of information, and together they rebuild an entire song. All before you finish adjusting the earbud that somehow never fits perfectly on the first try. There's one more piece of this story that's worth mentioning, because it's often misunderstood. You may have heard that Bluetooth was invented by actress Hedy Lamarr. It's a wonderful story. It's also not quite true. During World War II, Hedy Lamarr and composer George Antheil patented a system that rapidly changed radio frequencies to make radio-controlled torpedoes more difficult to jam. It was an ingenious idea and an important milestone in the history of spread spectrum communication, but Bluetooth wasn't built directly from that patent. Instead, Bluetooth emerged decades later from advances in digital radio, engineering work at Ericsson, and the cooperation of companies trying to establish a common wireless standard. So while Lamarr absolutely deserves recognition for helping advance the broader science behind frequency hopping communication, the Bluetooth technology inside your headphones has its own history. And I think that history is fascinating enough without needing to simplify it. So, why is it called Bluetooth? Because a group of engineers trying to unite competing technologies borrowed the name of a king, remembered for uniting competing kingdoms. Why does the logo look so unusual? Because it's made from Herald Bluetooth's initials, written in ancient Viking runes. And how does Bluetooth actually work? Your devices quietly introduce themselves, they recognize one another, they establish trust, they weave their way through an invisible maze of competing radio signals, and they exchange thousands of tiny packets of information that eventually become the music, podcasts, phone calls, and videos we hear every day. The engineering behind Bluetooth is undeniably impressive, but I think the real breakthrough is something much simpler. Not the radio, the agreement. Radio waves already existed, brilliant engineers already existed, wireless communication already existed. What Bluetooth gave the world was a common language that allowed devices built by completely different companies to understand one another. In a way, that brings us right back to Harold Bluetooth. His legacy wasn't remembered because he built something with his own hands. It was remembered because he brought people together. 1,000 years later, a group of engineers borrowed that same idea. Every time your phone connects to your headphones, your car, or your watch, you're seeing another tiny act of cooperation between devices that were designed by different people in different countries by different companies, all agreeing to speak the same language. Tomorrow, you'll probably tap that familiar little symbol without giving it a second thought. But before your music begins, two tiny computers will quietly recognize one another, pick up a conversation they started long ago, and begin talking beneath the initials of a Viking king who died more than 1,000 years ago. Stay curious, friends. Thanks for spending a few minutes being curious with me today. If you enjoyed the journey, I'd really appreciate a like. And if you'd like to join me for the next curiosity, I'd love to have you here.